So I got Rick first. Rick here. Oh, you want to jump on the other side? Rick, then David, and then Fraser's last.
Yeah, he'll be back in a minute.
Oh, there he is. Where's the crowd gone? They're all at lunch. Is the bar open? If the bar was open, that would explain it, because I'd be at the bar. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, indeed. What should we talk about?
Cybersecurity management, educating managers or something.
Did you go? Anything good come out? Was there anything good come out of it, or usual words? That's like I was saying to someone. Yeah, that's what I was saying before. I was saying there's a lot of right sounds are coming out, but they don't come down the chain. You know? There's too many rice bowls underneath that don't want to change.
I actually teach graduates of Boston called Network Institute of Technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, based out of Maryland. Been up to Boston a
Yeah.
few times for business. This place.
Just a couple more minutes, guys. See if anyone else filters in. Good to go? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll get started. People still filtering in, but we'll kick off this session. My name's Major Jason Broderick. As you probably worked out, I'm not US military, I'm Australian Army, here representing the Cyber Battle Lab CCOE as an embed. It's my pleasure this afternoon to present an academic panel. It's the third in a series of CCOE briefs at the Engagement Theatre. And I have three academic panellists here today who are going to brief on three quite diverse topics in response to a BAA we sent out about a month ago. All right, so the agenda for today's brief is, as stated on the board, I'm going to go through and just give a bit of a background to the purpose for the academic panel in a moment, and then I'll hand over to the presenters who will go through and provide a brief on their specific topic. They'll get about 10 minutes each to present, then they'll be open for questions to the audience for 5 minutes. I'll cut it off at 5 minutes just due to time constraints. If we have time at the end of the period at 1600, I'll open it back up for further commentary. Now, be aware that straight after this is a CyberQuest brief, which I know a lot of industry are interested in. It's going to give a bit more background to what CyberQuest is doing. This is a taste of some of the areas that CyberQuest is looking at, and the answers that these panellists have provided are in answers to the BAA we sent out as a prelude to the CyberQuest BAA. All right, just to introduce the panel members, I've introduced myself. I'm the random foreigner, Major Jason Broderick. My other panellists are Mr. Rick Trilling from the Wentworth Institute of Technology, Mr. David Cornwall from Booz Allen Hamilton, and Mr. Frank Hudson, who is also from Booz Allen Hamilton. It's important to note that we had 12 papers submitted by a variety of industry and academia, and 3 which we chose. So these were the 3 best and most diverse papers that were submitted, and so it's my pleasure to present them here today. All right, so what was the purpose of doing this? The purpose was to allow academia to respond to some of the exam questions we had leading into CyberQuest. There are a number of questions and objectives that the Cyber COE is chasing, in particular in how we inform future capability requirements and how we design the CyberQuest itself. So there's a number of points there, but the main one is obviously to inspire and cultivate research topics and early product ideas. So one of the things that the Cyber Battle Lab does is look at early technologies in the TRL level 3 to 7, and look at and see where do they fit in. Are the capabilities or effects these systems are providing to us worthy of new requirements or worthy of further investigation? The flip side for a lot of vendors who participate in these activities and for academia is actually to get response from the customer. So what is the customer after? What sort of things can the customer provide to the vendor or academia that will inform future discussion? The problem statement given to academia was surrounding Army Warfighting Challenge 7. In particular, how we assure access and integrity of critical data and information networks. This is an ongoing challenge. This is not new. This is not new to most first world nations, to be brutally honest. This is a common issue, as is the congested environment that we're working in. And the papers today will talk about some of these challenges and some recommendations on how we might answer that. Additionally, the ability to analyse, synthesise cyberspace operations information is becoming more important. In particular, during CyberQuest this year, we found it increasingly complex on how we actually firstly capture all the data that was in the environment, and how do we analyse that and produce an output to the commander that they can use to inform the decision cycle. So, big data analytics is thrown around a lot these days about how we do this, but it's easier said than done. So part of what we try to do here is explore different ways, means and methods to achieve these outcomes. The short-term capability gaps are stated there. There's a few of note. Firstly is that tactical forensics and malware detection and analysis. That's actually 3 parts, one of which I've just talked about before, which is that forensic side. How do we capture all this information and then put it through some kind of analysis to produce an outcome? And the other 2, again, refer to a very similar concept. Big data analytics, again, it's all very well in the enterprise to have big data analytics. We've got server rooms and all of that sort of infrastructure behind you. How do you do it in the tactical environment? And more commanders are saying, lighten my load. How do I decrease the amount of stuff I'm taking into the field and on operations? And now we're saying, by the way, you need these extra equipment to now deploy into the field. So it's becoming increasingly complex. The near-term capability gaps are as stated there, and we had some long-term capability gaps as well that we threw out as part of the BAA process. It was important to try and capture the short, medium and long-term requirements Part of what CyberQuest does in particular is not look at just the now, but what's happening in the years to come. And I believe that the panellists here have gone some way into answering or exploring those questions, and they'll provide their insights into how they've explored those topics and their recommendations for the future. Righto, before I open it up to the panellists, does anyone have any questions of me about how we actually got to this juncture? Is everyone understanding my English okay? All right. I do have problems from time to time. I should have said g'day, how are you going? So anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Mr. Rick Trilling. Mr. Trilling has been an associate professor at Wentworth Institute of Technology since 2010. He served as a visiting associate professor at Boston University, and he was a partner at Lemon Man and Trilling, a business and computer law firm. His education includes Bachelor of Arts, a Juris Doctor degree, and a Master's in Business Administration. I'd like you to help me in welcoming Mr. Rick Trilling.
So somewhere this morning I heard General Morrison pointing out commentary about just the inflection of his tone about lawyers, so I hope you'll forgive me. I'm a recovering lawyer, former lawyer. So good afternoon. Just to start off, I was just wondering if anybody here remembers or has ever heard of the Peter Principle. Thank you. Some people have certainly heard of it, some other people who don't want to admit their age, I'm sure. So the Peter Principle is about half a century old. A professor came out with a conception that says that in creating managers in industry, in all walks of life, cream rises until it sours. We tend to take people who are great at their jobs, at their workforce tasks, and promote them into positions, managerial positions, for which they have neither the training nor the experience. And unfortunately, that's a problem in cybersecurity today. That would be the right button. And unfortunately, many cybersecurity managers are wonderful technologists who have been, as with others in the Peter Principle, cream rises until it sours. They've been rewarded with their expertise in technology by moving up through the ranks into positions for which they have no managerial skill sets. Alternatively, MBAs, many of the cybersecurity managers in the three sectors have been have been brought in with excellent managerial skill sets, but no fundamentals of cybersecurity. And this is becoming more and more unacceptable in such a mission-critical situation, domain such as cybersecurity. I believe it was General Funk this morning who was mentioning the idea of building an airplane in mid-flight. Not the best way to run any kind of an industry. And for decades, industries learned long ago. Healthcare, there are joint degrees for healthcare management. Financial industry has finance fundamentals and managerial core skill sets. The solution to the situation for cybersecurity today is to try and come up with the kind of educational opportunities, the learning outcomes, the educational materials, and the delivery methods, frankly, that will allow cybersecurity managers that are existing managers to have the expertise that they need, to have rising technologists be able to bring that while they're still in the pipeline, go into 20-somethings who are getting potentially joint degrees. As I've said, since mature industries have long since dealt with this industry, you would wonder why cybersecurity has not dealt with this yet. And if you think about how young, relatively young, cybersecurity is, it's a little bit more of an understandable situation. What we do have is the fact that there are thousands and thousands of workforce jobs that go unfilled with technologists, and that's quite visible. Managers, this was an issue that was a little bit less visible because managers, technologists are being promoted into those positions, MBAs are being put in those positions. So you have people filling those positions. Unfortunately, that's not meeting the requirements. And the kind of risks that we have today in cybersecurity, that's just not acceptable. General Morrison also mentioned what a difference a year makes. So I like to point out what the US Army has been doing. And about a year or so ago, I had the pleasure of sitting with a captain at Harvard Kennedy School who was going through the ranks, and she was telling me how the Army had inherited this horrible structure from the NSA, the other public agencies, which is exactly the structure that we have right now, rising up through without any fundamentals of managerial, of leadership, of any of the necessities. And clearly the Army, with the various MOS and all the designations, just in the past year that I've come across, the Army has taken this back to basics, has created this from ground up, and is attempting to make sure that through the pipeline, for years and decades to come, the Army is going to have, and the rest of the military I hope is going to follow, the kind of leadership in cybersecurity that's going to be necessary to accomplish the function. The Army also joined with, here we go. The Army also, General Morrison mentioned this morning, also joined with NICE, which is a government agency under the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, NSA, you may have heard of, no such agency, National Science Foundation, and others. And what they've been doing is dealing with the fact that for several years, you've had cybersecurity fundamentals programs, undergraduate, graduate, but what you've had have been hundreds of different programs, all going their own different ways with no real accrediting bodies, no standards for each other. The result was you had inconsistency in the kind of education that was being provided, and the result was also that you had inconsistency in the graduates that were coming out. With this latest effort, which actually culminated yesterday, talk about timing, the National Cybersecurity Workforce Guidelines came out from all those agencies together. And what they've identified are what are the core skill sets fundamental to cybersecurity technologists. But at the same time, they've come together and spoken about the need to educate from the get-go, ab initio, cybersecurity managers. So we can't solve all these problems by creating brand new joint degree programs. Great for the 20-somethings that are going to rise up through the ranks, create a pipeline, and we'll have them ready in about 5 or 7 years. But we have to be able to do something for those who are already technologists and are rising into those promotion opportunities, for managers that exist and need to have the technology background but not the core skill sets, for the other branches that maybe want to follow what the Army is doing. And one of the things that we can do to buy time for that is flexible delivery methods. So there are opportunities to take the kind of curricula that we're designing and deliver them in different formats. A 2-day immersive program, a 1-week seminar, maybe a course per quarter for these individuals. By using the online platform delivery systems we have now, we can get that information to a great number of cybersecurity managers and those who are coming into that domain. So if we're going to deal with these kind of situations, we're going to have to design cybersecurity specific management training. Now, if you're in a typical, traditional, generalized MBA program, you're going to find that you're going to have the kinds of case studies that are general for various different industries, because you need to be able to identify the core skill sets for whichever industries these graduates are going to be going into. However, all these industries that I've mentioned, that over the years, finance, you have financial management degree programs that give you the fundamentals of finance and managerial core skill sets. They've identified financial management issues, healthcare delivery systems, same thing, healthcare management issues. There are clearly cybersecurity management specific issues that can be delivered along with all of these other all the other curricular information that we want to be able to get. We all know what happened a few days, about a week or two ago, in the outer islands, Ocracoke Island. Somebody hit a power cable. Well, the economic impact on that and the impact on day-to-day life, imagine if that was caused by a cyber attack on a SCADA system that impacted a power grid. Those are the kind of case studies we want the managers of our cybersecurity workforce to be prepared to handle. And for the sake of time, I'm going to be careful about going through some of the rest of these. Essentially, we've been dealing with end users over the last several years in terms of, is this a problem? To which I must explain to you very quickly, I was met with variations on the word duh, as though I should have known this in advance. Now the situation that I'm dealing with is, okay, what is it that we can best serve you with? And from the three sectors, from the military, from public agencies, from private enterprise, we're beginning to get a sense of individual examples of what that curriculum should consist of. And that's actually in the process of being developed right now. Grants through NSA at the moment and others. Others ask, why can't we just give our cybersecurity managers a copy of the 10-day MBA or something like that? Well, if most industries operated on hoping that their managers could get that level of expertise from a book, I don't think we'd be operating the way we are today. The best we can do is to provide for industry managers that have those core skill sets. For public agencies, for private enterprise, for mission critical cybersecurity issues in the military, you can't just rely upon a book. You have to make sure that we can work our way through making sure everybody has the expertise necessary. You'll forgive me, I've been told that I'm limited to about 10 minutes, so I'm structuring myself a little bit more quickly. Incentives, I'll maybe go 1 minute over if I can. So right now, the National Science Foundation offers 1, 2, or 3 years full tuition to undergraduate students that will join undergraduate cybersecurity programs and then go into various government agencies, military, and get 1, 2, or 3 years back. There have to be incentives like that to incentivize cybersecurity managers to get the training that they need as well. In summary, we need to be able to deal with this issue. We need to be able to come up with consistent curricula. We're in the process of doing that. We have the delivery platforms and the delivery methods available to make this practical. We have the issues identified, and we're beginning to pull that together. The research moving forward is dealing with what the end user's specific needs are. And clearly, from what you heard this morning, you don't mess around with a mission-critical situation like cybersecurity when you're trying to figure out who's going to manage the workforce. I thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer any of those. Yes, please.
So Phil Suarez of Esri. So my question is mainly in regard, I've seen a lot of community of practices going after core competencies, and that's often met with a lot of challenge across services. And so I was just wondering if you can comment on to what is that community body that's actually tracking these core competency and gaining consensus so that folks can adapt this richness that you're talking about in this training.
Allow me to answer that from two perspectives. One is who's designing the core competencies that should be required from an accreditor standpoint. So within the MBA, from the business side of things, those are coming from existing business accreditors. You have the AACSB, you have IACB, organizations that have been around for quite a long time, and they've identified between them about 11 or 12 core managerial skill set areas, really breaks down to about 18 subsets, that any manager should know in order to manage well. In terms of the cybersecurity side of things, just really didn't have much. You had ISC squared, and they were beginning to get into that, but you now have between, again, the military, NSA, NSF, ACM, which is Association of Computing Machinery, and I know I've left somebody out there. You have a very, very wide swath of industry, of the three sectors: public agencies, private industry, and military. I would commend to you, in terms of answering specific answer to your question, a document that came out yesterday, which is entitled the National Cybersecurity Workforce, and I'll be happy, anybody who wants to ask me, what did I say, I'll tell you afterwards. but this NCWF document came out of something called NICE, and it compiled everything from all of these different constituencies. I think I was told to have just a couple of questions, and then we'll do more afterwards. There was a second question? Yes, please.
I'm Beatrice Zhang, cyber officer in the U.S. Army, and I was wondering, what's the depth of your interaction with the Army and other military services? How much interaction have you had with them to make you draw the conclusion that soldiers and service members rise up through the ranks without sufficient manager or leadership training?
Thank you. And if I implied that enlisted and warrant officers rise up without sufficient training, I don't mean lack of leadership, but there are certain managerial skill sets that, in answer to your question, I'll answer that part of the question in a moment, have made very clear to me over the last few years. I have the luxury of attending Harvard Kennedy School has seminars with generals and captains in the Army and in various branches who have been expressing over the last 2.5 years to me that the system that they inherited was broken, and not in terms of leadership generally in the military, but in terms of the cybersecurity domain, trying to bring people up through that in a system that was inherited from the public agencies, such as NSA, was setting a lower standard. And the fact that the military has gone back to beginning and built an entire new structure, everyone else is beginning to look at that and begin to say maybe that's the way we should follow things.
So I'd just once again like to thank Mr. Rick Trilling for his brief and his candour. Thank you very much. All right, the next briefer is Dr. David Cornwall. Dr. Cornwall worked as a senior crypto mathematician at the National Security Agency, where he was a code breaker. He is currently employed at Booz Allen Hamilton as a lead engineer in the Cyber Assurance Testing Laboratory. Dr. Cornwall tests cryptographic modules against FIPS 140-2 standards and tests security products against the common criteria protection profiles. He has given several talks on at the International Cryptographic Module Conference, I hadn't heard of that one, on the following topics: quantum computing, entropy, and most recently the classical and quantum cryptoanalysis of AES. Dr. Cornwall has a PhD in applied mathematics from UMBC, and his thesis was entitled Amplified Quantum Transforms. Today, Dr. Cornwall will brief crypto alternatives in a quantum computing environment. Please welcome Dr. Cornwall.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to my talk today. This is the agenda for my talk. There's going to be 11 slides. First of all, I'll be talking about the impact of quantum computing on today's cryptographic systems. Then I'll be describing some possible future cryptographic systems which will be invulnerable to quantum attacks. I'll be talking about the NIST's call for quantum-resistant algorithms and transitioning the infrastructure, and then some conclusions. So where does this come from, the justification for this? From the Joint Operating Environment, says that quantum cryptography will lead to a new encryption and decryption techniques which may significantly enhance communications in electromagnetically cluttered or denied environments. The long-term capability gap is crypto alternatives in a quantum computing environment. And what is the impact of quantum computers on cryptography, and what types of cryptography will replace current methods? So how do quantum computers work? A qubit is a component of a quantum register. It can be 0 or 1, or it can be 0 and 1 at the same time in a superposition. A quantum register with n qubits can contain 2 to the n data items in the superposition, where each data item is between 0 and 2 to the n minus 1. and each data item has a probability associated with it. Quantum computers act on this superposition, updating the probabilities. At the end of the processing, a measurement is taken and a single answer is produced. Peter Shor in 1994 showed that there's potential for exponential speedup when attacking existing cryptographic systems. And Love Grover showed that there's quadratic speedup when you're searching for an item in a list. So there are two types of quantum computers. There's the universal quantum computer, which you can program to do anything you like. And in May, China announced that they had a 10-qubit quantum computer. Also in May, IBM announced that they had built a 16 and 17-qubit quantum computer. Google is aiming for a 49-bit quantum computer by the end of this year. If we were to assume a quantum Moore's law, which is pure speculation, we don't have enough data points for that yet, but if you were to consider doubling qubits every 18 months, you would have a quantum computer with over 2,500 qubits within 12 years. Now, there's a specialized quantum computer with currently 2,000 qubits by D-Wave, and that performs a very specialized optimization algorithm. Currently, I'm aware of no impact that that has on today's cryptographic systems. This table shows you existing cryptographic systems. On the left-hand side, we have the algorithm name, such as AES 256, which can be used to protect top-secret information. It has 256 bits of pre-quantum security, but with a quantum computer, it would only have 128 bits of security because of Grover's algorithm. Lower down the list, we have RSA 3072, which can also be used to protect top secret information. That has 128 bits of security strength, but with a large enough quantum computer, that would be broken by Shor's algorithm. So how big must the quantum computer be in order for it to break RSA? With a 3072-bit key, you would need about double the number of qubits, so say about 6,000 qubits to break RSA 3072. With elliptic curve cryptography, that was also broken with a large enough quantum computer. As an example here, 384-bit EC Diffie-Hellman currently has a security strength of 194 bits, but to find out the number of qubits you'd need, you have to multiply it by about 6, which gives you 2,300 qubits. So this shows that elliptic curves are currently less secure in a quantum environment than are RSA or Diffie-Hellman. The security strength of cryptographic algorithms depends on the hardness of certain problems. AES is a good algorithm design, and you need a very good entropy for the key. For RSA, the problem is factoring, which is a very difficult problem to solve, unless you have a quantum computer. And Diffie-Hellman, the hardness of the problem is the discrete log problem. In post-quantum cryptography, these are classical algorithms. However, they've been designed so that they're immune from quantum attacks. There are three major types of algorithms. There's code-based encryption. This dates from 1978. And the hardness of the problem is given a public matrix, cipher, and a number of errors in a code word. Try to recover the key or the message. Lattice-based encryption, the hardness problem is to find a lattice point close to another point. And with multivariate quadratic equation signatures, the hardness problem is solving a system of quadratic equations over GF2, or over basically 0 and 1 arithmetic. There are other types of post-quantum cryptography, lattice-based signatures and hash-based signatures. So I'll go over the next 3 slides contain some crypto math stuff to do with how the algorithms work. I'll just go through them fairly quickly. The Mcleese crypto system, which is for code-based encryption, uses G, which is a secret generator matrix. From this, you're able to construct a public key, and you use the public key to multiply it by the message that is to be encrypted. You then XOR in a Z, which is a random vector of ones, which is secret, and then you obtain the ciphertext. So the hardness problem is to recover the message given the public key, ciphertext, and T, which is the number of ones. For lattice-based encryption, it's a bit more complicated. It involves random polynomials, and the f of x and g of x are random polynomials of degree n minus 1. You form f of x, little f of x, and little g of x from those polynomials, and then you form a public key, h of x. To encrypt a message, m of x, which is another polynomial, you multiply r of x times h of x, and you add in the message polynomial and you do some reductions to get some ciphertext out. So the hardness of this problem is given f and g, is to recover f and g given the ciphertext and the public key h of x. This is an example of finding a point close to another point in a lattice. For multivariate quadratic equation signatures, you take a message which you hash, and then you have a set of polynomials which have a special secret structure. And you're able to solve a system of quadratic equations to discover what the signature is. However, somebody who doesn't know what the secret structure is unable to solve the system of equations. So that's just to give you a flavor of the kinds of cryptographic systems that are being considered. Now, NIST has called for, back in December of last year, for a competition for quantum-resistant public key cryptographic algorithms. The deadline for the submission of these algorithms is November of this year, and there'll be submissions mainly from academics around the world, rather like there was a competition for AES and for SHA-3. Now, the NIST has said that the time frame for vetting these algorithms will be about 3 to 5 years of analysis, and then another 2 years to update all of the standards. So these next generation of quantum-resistant crypto algorithms will be used in all of the protocols that we're used to using. Now, a big problem is transitioning the infrastructure to use these new algorithms. We learned from the transition to NSA Suite B, which uses elliptic curve cryptography, that it was expensive, that it took years of effort, and all of the networking and communications devices had to be updated. Now, suppose NIST proposed a new quantum-resistant algorithm today. How long would it take to transition the infrastructure to use these new quantum algorithms? I think it would be a much more significant change than NSA Suite B. These are completely new algorithms with new key sizes. All of the standards for the protocols have to be updated, and there'll be quite a big learning curve to understand the new algorithms and how to use them. So my conclusion is that the Army should incorporate the transition to new algorithms in long-term plans and identify risk mitigation strategy now. They should identify a cadre of experts to represent the Army in the field of post-quantum cryptography, and should educate the cybersecurity workforce of the impact of quantum computers and on the progress being made by NIST's call for quantum-resistant algorithms. These are the references for my paper and for today's talk, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Dr. Cornwall, given your expertise and knowledge, and presuming that data we have stored on, top secret data we have stored in computers that is encrypted, perhaps it's in a, brigade combat team headquarters or a division or corps level headquarters, and or that that a threat has, is intercepting our traffic. What is your prediction, or what is your estimation for how soon does the Army really need to get its algorithms corrected for encryption, or otherwise, you're going to be broken, dude. They'll have everything, whatever you've got, they've got it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are certain time frames to consider. If you consider the NIST competition, within 5 to 7 years, you'll have a new set of algorithms. But during that time frame, you're still going to be using existing classical algorithms. And so if we were to look ahead 10 to 15 years and say in 10 to 15 years there'll be a quantum computer that can break everything, then your data that you created within the next 7 years will only be secure for, I don't know, another 5 to 10 years, if you're lucky. The problem right now is that it's very early on. We don't have enough data points to look ahead, so we're really speculating. But this is like the dawn of the quantum computer. We've seen IBM produce a 16 and 17 qubit machine very rapidly. Last year it was a 5-bit machine. And so I think the path towards increasing sizes of quantum computers will be rapid from this point onwards. It's not just the US that's doing this. Europe is doing this as well. They're spending lots of money in developing quantum computers. So I would be very worried over the next 5 to 7 years. And I think, I mentioned there should be a risk mitigation strategy. I think one of those mitigation strategies is to use much larger keys wherever possible, such as for RSA or Diffie-Hellman. And also, I mentioned that elliptic curve cryptography is a little bit weaker under a quantum computing environment than other algorithms are. So, I'm not someone to recommend everyone move away from elliptic curve cryptography, but in the near future, that's something that should be considered.
Good afternoon. I don't know much about cryptography, but it's my understanding that ECC became popular recently because of power consumption, that it's much easier on cell phones and whatnot than RSA was. Do we have any expectations for what power requirements and compute power and whatnot we're going to need for quantum resistant cryptos? We're using these KGs now that are awful. Are we going to have something bigger and worse than that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's too early to say because the algorithms, we don't know what the algorithms are yet. They're being submitted to NIST by the end of this year, and next April there'll be a conference where the submitters will have the opportunity to describe all of the new algorithms. And so the part of the analysis going forward will be to identify what kinds of platforms will they be optimized for. So that'll be answered soon, maybe in the next year or so.
As along the same lines, but with the increased size of the public keys, are we going to need more powerful devices to do post-quantum crypto?
So the question is to do with the increased size in crypto
Because
keys?
some of them are significantly larger than current crypto systems, right?
Right, so one of the examples I gave was to do with code-based encryption, which uses matrices. The key size is of the order of megabits for that kind of algorithm, which might be completely impractical to be used in any operational environment, at least a tactical environment. But there are other algorithm types where the key size will be a lot less. I think it will be a lot bigger than what we're used to right now, but it won't be as big as a megabit.
Just like you join me in thanking Dr. Cornwall for his presentation. I found that presentation myself when I read the paper quite alarming, not only from a military perspective and securing our own information, but if you look at the commercial sector, every time you log on to internet banking, all right, there's encryption there which will be broken under these circumstances. And as Dr. Cornwall said, the Moore's law mightn't apply to this particular circumstance, and it might actually increase at a much faster rate. So it behoves us, I suppose, to start putting pressure on industry to start looking at some of these solutions for us. The next and last presenter is Mr. Frank Hudson. Mr. Hudson is a senior lead engineer at Booz Allen Hamilton. He earned his bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering from the University of Colorado, and his interests include applying new technologies to challenges he experienced during his career in the United States Navy. Now, his presentation today is quite a mouthful, so please allow me to go through it. It's a time-frequency domain technique for mitigating non-stationary interference to the global positioning system. By the way, at the end of all three briefs, there'll be a maths quiz, all right? So hopefully everyone's taking notes. Thanks, Frank. Over to you.
And while they load that, I'll just go ahead and introduce myself a little bit more. I've been with Booz Allen Hamilton for 2 years now, and I saw a very huge investment in assured PNT, position, navigation, and timing. And as part of that investment, I was asked to investigate signal processing techniques to mitigate interference, interference specific to GPS.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're just having some technical difficulties opening the presentation. You just give us a couple of minutes, we'll get it sorted out. Thank you.
Testing. As we're waiting, are there any other questions for the panel members? Any other questions?
So how many of you out there are managers in cybersecurity who I've managed to insult? Good, I hope not. When I come into to a situation like this and I'm looking at the idea of how we can take a problem that's been identified to me, and I was very fortunate about 3 years ago, I was visiting friends down, I keep saying south, but now I'm not sure where I am, I think north of here. Anyway, and in certain public agencies, and they were identifying that issue of cybersecurity management issues. And as I mentioned in response to Beatrice's question before, that I've had the luxury of being able to attend, not conferences, but seminars that are held under something called the Chatham House Rule. And under the Chatham House Rule, not able to identify the people, not able to identify anything, say anything that would identify directly back to them. But it's been fascinating to me that all the way up the chain of command, there's an indication that the military was exceedingly unhappy with the structure that they inherited from NSA, CIA, and others in trying to deal with the cybersecurity domain. So they went back to basics, they started all over again, and now in a relatively short period of time, in my personal opinion, they've begun to develop a framework that everybody else really needs to be following. The military obviously has, well, let me put it this way, I don't come from the military, so I'm not sure how you see the military implementing new ideas. I come from academia, where it's almost a joke that academia operates very slowly. So I was thrilled to see that the Army certainly was implementing this in a fairly short period of time. And as I came in here, I thought to myself, yesterday when I saw the attendees, and I realized, okay, I'm probably going to be speaking to cybersecurity managers and telling them they're not as prepared as they could be or should be. I stand by the concept that cybersecurity, if back home, we have insurance industries, Liberty Mutual, we have Fidelity Investments, we have a large number of organizations where nobody dies. You might lose some money, something might happen. But a mission-critical industry like cybersecurity, you cannot allow less than the optimum circumstances available. I'm still vamping if you, okay, continue.
Okay, unfortunately, I don't have the actual PowerPoint working. There's something up with the slideshow, so there's a PDF printout. I'm going to try to walk you through the slides, but you won't have the nice videos or cool graphics. Anyway, as I originally said, my specific task was to mitigate interference to GPS. And why GPS? It's critical to everything, especially the success of DoD missions. And GPS is very vulnerable to being interfered with. It operates at a minus 160 dB watts, so it's very vulnerable to being interfered with. And there's a variety of commercial GPS jammers that can be readily purchased off the internet. And what we've seen with the waveforms from these jammers is that they're typically swept CW tone types. They can sweep through the spectrum extremely fast, which makes it difficult to mitigate. Another technical issue. Okay. Can they scroll down a little bit, maybe? All right. And so when you're considering interference against a GPS receiver, you actually have to take a holistic view of the receive chain. If the RF front end's being jammed, say your amplifier is saturated, there's not a lot you can do in signal processing land to fix that. However, the scope of this investigation was as a signal conditioner. If implemented, it would be between the antenna and the receiver, and basically clean the signal environment of any interference, improve the signal quality so that it can be processed by the receiver. So in this depiction here on the left is an aggregate of acquisition planes for multiple satellite vehicles that are being processed by a GPS receiver. You can see that the correlation lobes are extremely prominent and very narrow in frequency and code phase. So that's really good for GPS. When it's being interfered with, the acquisition plane looks like that on the right. And obviously, it's hard to find where those main lobes are so that you can track. Next page, please. All right. So this is an example of a swept CW tone. If we had the video going, you'd see that prominent peak sweeping from left to right. And the gist of the technique is to convert the signal environment into both time and frequency cells to isolate the power from the jammer, detect those cells that have that, zeroize those coefficients, and then through an inverse transform, recreate the signal environment minus the interference. Next. Okay, so methods of converting into time frequency domain have been around for quite a while. Typically, wavelets are used. Wavelets are time-limited, sinusoid. However, typically they're dyadic filter banks, meaning that they're decimated by 2 on every stage. So you're limited in the number of stages that you can have, and you're also really constrained into how tight in both time and frequency those cells can be. So for example, if we wanted to mitigate and interfere, we would have to wipe out an entire cell. And we can skip that one, it's not relevant anymore. So recently there was a new type of wavelet transformer that enables the user to be able to better define the coverage on the time frequency domain. So our H omega is a low pass filter that basically segregates or subbands the signal that we're interested in. And then our analysis filters are G omega and G minus omega, which creates a bandpass filter. And the wavelet that we happen to pick is called a Morlet. It's like a sinusoid, but time limited. And as another feature of this wavelet transformer is a chirp factor, so we can actually add a frequency shift to the wavelet. And so the depiction in the lower right-hand corner is an example of what the coverage on the TFD domain looks like. Recall the other wavelet one was by 2, and this one we have a lot more control on how we cover it, which means we can better localize the power from the jammer and better isolate it so that we can remove it and preserve the signal that we care about, in this case GPS. All right, so this is just a block diagram of how it's implemented. You can see that for any G omega inject, there were multiple H omegas behind it, so we can combine the transfer functions of all those filters into a single G omega. So that's actually how we implemented it. This isn't so relevant, but it shows the effectiveness of a jammer as you go off the carrier frequency. And what it shows is that as you get farther away, you need a lot more power from the jammer to be effective. Which means that we can create a filter bank that's subbanded like this, if what we care about are frequencies that are closer to the center. These parameters were somewhat arbitrarily picked. Since then, since this research, we've come up with better parameters. So there is some distortion by the subbanding, but it's a 37-stage filter. And next slide. And to test it, we created a synthetic environment. We actually took live sky GPS data, and then we injected our own jamming waveforms. So hop CW, swept CW, and then even experimented with just single tones and pulsed CW. And after generating those waveforms and injecting it, we compared the performance against a real GPS receiver before the jamming, during the jamming, and then after our signal conditioning. And I really wish the videos played for this one, because this really shows it. But again, we have a swept CW tone on the top, and then after mitigation, you can see the environment's completely clean. But there was also a tone in the original live sky that also got mitigated. So the signal quality was actually better going through the signal conditioner than live sky. And in the upper right-hand corner was a video showing the acquisition plane during jamming. It's a video. And then we're able to recover 4 satellite vehicle lobes in the second video. And then on the bottom is a depiction of the time frequency domain with the jammer present. So you can make out, intuitively, you can see that swept jammer and what cells it occupied. Next slide. So the bottom line is the approach works. We haven't actually implemented it as a real-time hardware device, and it would be really interesting if we were able to do that so we can compare it against other signal processing techniques that have been out there. But also to note, this isn't just applicable to GPS, it's applicable to any wideband signal like SATCOM, so long as that the interferer has a much narrower bandwidth. And that concludes my brief. Are there any questions?
So when you're talking about the sweep itself, are you referring to just one source of jamming, or could that be applied to multiple sources of jamming?
Right. So actually we did experiment with multiple jammers in the same spectrum that we captured, and it really comes down to how much of the overall spectrum is overlapped. So you can have multiple tones as long as they truly are tones.
So when you're looking at this, how did you take into account for multipath, especially when you're looking at a GPS signal that's coming in, you're going to have reflection and refraction coming to the source. Was that taken into account when you're looking at a jammer that's terrestrial based versus aerial or celestial based?
No, it was not actually. However, we did do some analysis with multipath, and if I recall, there was a certain distance before it really made any kind of difference.
What is is there a time frame? Are you planning, I know you said that, are you going to do a prototype soon that you want to experiment against, having a GPS receiver? Because one of the venues we explored some of that last year, but I'd be curious, what's the timeline on when you want to try to put it into a prototype form factor for it to be maybe evaluated,
Sure.
To help, the Army?
So all of this was post-processed. We actually did generate and test it against a real receiver, and it worked great. But a real-time implementation is going to require more funding, which I'm trying to do. Yes, sir.
Like any fix, you were brought in to fix a problem. Now that you know how the problem has been fixed. My suggestion is to kind of put you on the red team when they test this thing and try to break your fix. I mean, who better? I know you have the inside knowledge of it, but somebody that has that kind of smarts need to be the one trying to knock this thing down, because if you build it as the next best thing and someone has already broken that in a basement, just tinkering around with it, and we're not looking at it that way. We're looking to see if it works. And I think somehow we need to get that kind of in a twofold process to kind of say, okay, here's the things that I've done. Can someone try to break this thing here? I'm not sure if you guys have done that yet or looked at it in that aspect. I know you're trying to fix things, but
right.
The kind of, based on the conversation here is we need to get ahead of ourselves as fast as we can. So, you're the knowledgeable person of this process right now. I'm just saying, think about trying to get in that mindset before, we come to an experimentation process and some smart specialists kind of knock it over, like I believe one of our engineers did with one of our SRW system. Basically found the problem at one of the exercises that no one knew about. So, kind of as you get an opportunity, think about that, please.
All right, sir, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
All right, so we've got a few minutes left. You've got the panel here available to ask any additional questions. I'd like to ask the panel to remain behind after the brief. I know there might be a few offline questions that need to be asked, and probably not for the general audience. Was there any final questions for the panel at this juncture? All right, I'd just like to remind everyone that the panellists provided their papers and their time off their own bat for this. It was in response to a BAA that was sent out by the Cyber COE. And I'd like to personally thank all three of you for taking the time out to not only provide really comprehensive answers to some of the questions that were asked in the BAA, but also for the candour in your the answers to some of the questions we had today. So please join me in thanking the panellists. At this point, we've got another question over here.
By the way, if you need to be scanned in for CME, I'll be right here at the back of the chairs.
Are any of these papers going to be published? I mean, are you publishing them somewhere where we can download them and see them, or what?
Yeah, we can definitely do that. So if you come and see myself or Mr. Horace Carney after that, we can provide that. Okay, it'll be posted on the FCS site somewhere. We'll send out some kind of a memo. All right, if that's all, thank you very much for your attendance this afternoon. As I said, the panellists will remain behind for some maths questions. Sorry. Yeah, and immediately following this at 4 p.m, there'll be the first of two CyberQuest briefs this afternoon's as an entree. And CyberQuest 18, and we'll be discussing that exam question, which is what are we looking for CyberQuest 18. So once again, thank you for your time, and we'll catch you shortly. Thank you.